Supervisor Fiedler calling Supervisor Fiedler. Folks, if we could find our seats, we'll begin in about 30 seconds.
Would the west side of the county please be seated?
Okay, we'll convene the Committee of the Whole. Just a reminder, because this is something we do about 2 or 3 times a year. It's just like any other committee that we have. It's fairly informal, but we do follow Robert's Rules of Order. Just ask everybody to keep that in mind as we progress, that we can have more of an exchange than we normally might have at the full board meetings, but we do try to keep it in order. I'll ask Christine to call the roll.
Lind? Here. Anderson?
He's not on Zoom.
Okay. Long?
Here.
Leaf? Here. Cook? Present. Adams?
Here.
Burning?
Present.
Attino?
Here.
Fiedler?
Here.
Osnes?
Present.
Counter?
Present.
Hanson?
Here.
Shirley?
Present.
Telejohn?
Present.
Carlson?
Here.
Barklow? Swanepoel?
Here.
Van Summeren?
Here.
And Ramberg.
Present.
I think Sean Anderson was going to join us by video when he joins us. Do we have a motion to approve our minutes from Thursday, October 27th, Committee of the Whole meeting? So moved by Cook and seconded by Supervisor Osnes. Any objections? They're approved. Public comment. Is there anybody in the public who'd like to make comment today? Anybody in the audience who'd care to make any comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to our business items. And our business today is the first step in consideration of the 2024 budget and budget priorities. I will call on the administrator to give us an overview. We've got some creative things we're going to be doing today, and it's obviously a very important meeting given the election last week that resulted in the referendum on public safety not being approved, and that tightens things up considerably as we consider budget items. So I'll call on the administrator at this point to give us an overview of where we're going today and how we're going to proceed.
Yeah, we'll start off with an overview of where we are for the year in the process. So right in the budget book is the process. We're in March. I know we're April, but we delayed it for the referendum. So we're in March. So we're the Committee of the Whole. This is the very start. This is the first meeting of the 2024 budget. Congratulations, everyone. We're going to go over what we foresee as the needs for next year, for 2024. All the department heads are here, and they're going to be presenting that information to you. And from that, we hope to establish budget priorities. So that's kind of big picture what we're going to do today. I'll go over the day at the end here then. So from there, we're going to continue to work on capital projects over the next few months. We're also going to be we'll come back with the budget priorities at the May County Board meeting for formal adoption as a form of resolution. So we have a little bit of time here to formalize those. Those will go to the admin committee for recommendation. From the May committee then, I lay out the priorities for the department heads, and they're going to submit budget requests then in the months of June and July. In August, I'll come back, talk to all the department heads, try to get the big picture of where everything is for the county. In September, we'll come back to all of the standing committees and review those budget requests. In October, we'll have another Committee of the Whole meeting where you'll see my recommendation for the budget. November then is the public hearing and adoption of the budget. So that's the year how it's going to be laid out. So today is probably really, really important because this establishes the guidelines that I'm passing on to all the department heads. And they're going to give you all of their opinions of what those guidelines should be. So today then, how we're going to do it is We'll hear from each of the department heads, and I think Supervisor Shirley is going to jump in right before the department heads with an idea that he wanted to share. But what we're going to do is we're going to hear from each of the department heads. They're going to talk about new things for 2024. So they're not going to talk about the status quo, things that they're already doing. We know that they do a lot of important things, a lot of great things. Those things are funded. What we're talking about is what is the new revenue that we have next year, and what are the new anticipated expenses for 2024, so that we can prioritize and match those up. So revenue-wise, I'm projecting about $1 million in new revenues that we will have. Sorry. We'll have about $1 million in new revenues for 2024. So when we think about today, how would we spend that $1 million? If the budget was entirely up to you, how would you allocate that $1 million to all of the requests that you're going to hear? So after we hear from the department heads, we're actually going to do an exercise where you're going to make that choice. So in the center here, we're pre-set up for an exercise that we'll do. It'll be a budget prioritization exercise, interactive, where all of you can get up and stretch your legs a little bit. At the conclusion of that exercise, and it'll only take about 10 minutes, we'll take a break. I'll tabulate the results from that exercise. We'll put it up on the screen, and then we can talk about, does that match what your budget priority expectation was? Did the exercise work to establish the priorities, or you can modify them at that point in time, or talk about it didn't go far enough, we need to take additional steps. So that's how today will lay out. So any questions about format? If not, I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Before I call on Supervisor Shirley, I'll call on Supervisor Kenner.
Just had one quick question on what you put out. You said we have about $1 million more this year. Can just on a real brief, high level, where the $1 million came from?
Sales tax and net new construction. Those are our two primary sources of revenue that go up every year. So it's just that.
Before I call on Supervisor Shirley, just a reminder, the committee of the whole is like our committees, so we can have motions and seconds and discussion. To be germane, they should relate to the budget or budget priorities, the topic of the meeting today. And depending on what happens on the motion, it can either be referred to the appropriate committee for further consideration or referred to the board. So depending on what happens on any motions, I'll try to do a quick consult with the chairman of the board, and we'll make a decision either now or later as to where it gets referred if something is adopted. With that, I'll call on Supervisor Shirley.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk about the funding for the Sheriff's Department. With the referendum failing, we need to find a way to fund them with what they need. So, I've talked to most of you about that before and what we need to do, but I think we need a plan moving forward. So, when looking through this, I think there's two things to kind of think about. One, in our last meeting, Ken, you said we have an unaudited fund balance of about $3.5 million from 2022. Is that correct?
Yeah. So for the year, that was the amount of revenues in excess of expenses.
Right. Right. And then we have an anticipated interest on the government center bond of about $2 million, give or take. So. And then we also have opioid settlement money coming in. So I think in that ball of funding, we need to kind of think about how we can fund the Sheriff's Department. So what I would like to see, and maybe we discuss this a little bit and forward this onto the board for a full adoption, because we can't do that here today, but what I'm proposing is that we half fund the Sheriff's Department ask, which the bond was 3.536507. So we half fund that for the last 6 months of 2023. So that equals $884,126. For the rest of 2023, that'll allow the sheriff to start hiring half of the staff that he's requested. And then in 2024, we three-quarter fund the, what that 3.5 million is, which equals 2.652 million. And we asked Ken to find the other quarter funding for in the 2024 budget. Then moving on in 2025, I know we can't do that now. We're not talking about 2025, but just to think long term, 2025, we could half fund 2025 with that money that I was talking about earlier. And then we would have to find in the budget a half of that funding. So we'd go from quarter funding to half funding. So we're only increasing what we have in the budget for the sheriff's department by a quarter each year. So we're not having to eat all of that in one big chunk. And then in 2026, we would have to come up with that other half of the 1.7 million in that budget. So that gives us a few years to figure that out. We're not biting that all off in one chunk. We're not trying to find that from other departments, but we can get funding not only in 2024, we can find it now and moving forward, and then it gives us a chance to catch up and get that fully funded from now on. So I would like to recommend that we move forward with that structure and vote on that in the next regular board meeting.
And that was a motion that Supervisor Shirley was making.
Yes, sorry.
And is there a second? Point of order. Supervisor Bernie.
Can we make motions is this part of that, since this is budget item, can we make motions like this?
Recommendations to go back to the standing committee to discuss further, or the county board as a recommendation. You're not making it's not a resolution,
Yeah.
but you're making a recommendation to discuss it further.
So we're going to vote on that, or we're going to?
Sounds like there's a motion, and
Okay,
if someone makes
I'll
a second.
second it if it's all right.
Supervisor Bernie seconds. Here's discussion. Supervisor Long.
So I'd like to hear from the county administrator, because what we're really doing is creating a pretty significant structural deficit that we may have trouble handling, and a pretty significant structural deficit, which we've always tried to avoid. And it may put us in a precarious position even as far out as 2025 or 2026, which probably is something we may want to consider avoiding.
Just before I call on Supervisor Shirley, Supervisor Hanson had his hand up. I don't know if, did you want to speak or?
I was going to say exactly what.
Okay, Supervisor Shirley.
Said.
Just a quick response. I didn't add all those numbers up for you, but if we take a half fund for the last 6 months of this year, three-quarters fund next year, half fund for the 2025 year, that totals $5.34 million. So out of the unaudited fund balance, the interest on the government center, that's $5.5 million plus any opioid settlement money that we have. So through 2025, we have the funding to do that today without an issue.
And we've talked about the interest on the government center expansion, and we don't really know. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what the things that we may or may not run into in particular, the remodel of this particular structure. So saving some of that based on what we may run into is probably a good idea from a building expansion or remodel standpoint. So I'd be a little hesitant to divert those interest money to other sources, I guess.
Supervisor Bernie.
The cash that we have on hand from operational overages, we can use that for operations. But we can borrow to cover anything that happens with the building, any overages or unforeseen needs that arise. What we can't borrow for is public protection. So I think Supervisor Shirley's proposal gives us several things. One, it gives us the ability to alleviate from our taxpayers the need to have to choose between putting a tax increase on themselves, which they clearly said no to, and reject public safety at the same time, or increase taxes and get public safety. So it comes back to us to roll our sleeves up and utilize these dollars in the wisest way. And again, I say, the overages from operational expenses from last year, the overages in revenue from expenses, and the interest that we're making on the bond deposits and the investments, those can be used for operations to alleviate while our levy catches up. So I think Supervisor Shirley's proposal is fantastic, and it puts the onus back on us, whether I'm here or not, but I should say this body, to have to make decisions again, rather than putting it to the public to have to continue to raise taxes on themselves to keep those departments running. So that's a nice job, Supervisor Shirley, and I think it's great.
Supervisor Leaf.
I had a question about the bond interest. I thought that was only going to be used, could only be used for capital, because it was a bond for a capital project, so the interest could only be used for a capital improvement. And that's when we were working on our budget, we had some items that fell off the budget that we were possibly going to fund with that money.
I don't know that it's legally required to only be used for that purpose. That was our planned use for it, though. When we've looked at the budget for the government center, we've been including the interest earnings in that total expenses to cover them.
And I had one other quick question. The opioid settlement dollars, we had allocated some of that already for a position in the jail mental health. So would there be any additional opioid money as Supervisor Shirley is proposing?
We're anticipating an additional $1 million in opioid money. Now, that money is restricted on how it can be used, so we would have to verify the use of it would match the legal requirements of the settlement agreement.
Supervisor Cook.
I understand the desire to fund the public safety area. It's really important. I am very concerned about moving forward multiple years ahead with essentially, as our chair mentioned, operational deficit. I'm really uncomfortable with that kind of budgeting moving forward. And also, I'm a little confused because we're here today to discuss all of the budget priorities. We have all the department heads here to talk about the needs that they have, and we haven't even heard those yet. So I'm not comfortable with this proposal right now, and because as a county, public safety is a key thing that we do, but we do a lot of key things for this community. And I think we need to hear those. So, thank you.
Just an observation. It's a pretty far-reaching and complicated proposal we're hearing for the first time. So I would just ask Supervisor Shirley if he would think it's reasonable to perhaps refer the idea to the Administration Committee, which will be taking this up in the next week at its first cut, with the idea that it comes to the board in 3 weeks for further discussion. And then everybody would have seen the pieces of paper that you've suggested orally. The committee will have had a chance to consider it. You'll have a chance, I think, to appear before the committee. I think the chairman would welcome that. And it can maybe be perfected, or there might be ideas that come to you over the next week. Would that be a reasonable way to proceed at this point?
I would agree with that, but I just wanted to throw that out there now, so then when we're looking through 2024, then we have this in mind that in this proposal, we're asking for a quarter fund, so $884,000 to be found somewhere in this 2024 budget. So that's why I wanted to bring it up before we started talking about everything else. And then one final point to Supervisor Long's point was that to take money out of the building expansion. What we also have to remember is that we have a very sizable contingency on that project of 5 point some million. I don't know that it's over $5 million, which is being in construction. That's a large contingency. So I think we have the ability, if we have some overages there, that we have funds. I'm not worried about that portion of it, so I just wanted to throw that on the table too.
If I heard everything correctly, Supervisor Shirley agreed basically with the suggestion. And so with that, we don't have to do anything too formal with regard to the amendment right now, but I think Supervisor Cook will put it on the agenda for the next administration meeting. Welcome Supervisor Shirley to appear and anybody else to appear and give comments to her in the meantime as to your thoughts on the general idea. And if you could circulate anything else on it to the full body, that would be helpful, or at least to the Committee on Administration. And then we'll be seeing that issue again then in about 3 weeks when we have our full board meeting. Okay, with that,
Yeah, so before you call for a vote,
No,
refer that to committee.
we'll just been referred. We're done.
There was a motion.
Yeah, well, that's,
I withdraw my motion, my second.
okay, so we're where we were.
Okay.
And now we're.
It looked like it's withdrawn.
Now we're moving to the presentations by the directors.
The order
Now-
of the presentations will be as they're laid out on the table of contents of the budget. It's just the easiest order to follow. So the circuit court is going to be first. So just one thing, so as you're thinking about today, and Supervisor Shirley's clearly been studying his numbers. He was spot on with all of them. But what we're looking for is budget prioritization. So right now, what I can tell you is I do anticipate we will have $1 million. But that budget priority doesn't end at the $1 million. It just says, that's what I think we'll fund with the new money coming in. There'll be priorities left over after that. What we have on the table is more than $1 million worth of expenditures. So the budget priorities will build into that. How we fund those, Supervisor Shirley has one idea. There may be other ideas that are available to us to fund that. So right now, we just need to establish what that priority list is, and then we'll talk about how to fund past the $1 million once we get there. So with that, we will start then with the circuit court. Is that you, Rebecca?
Good morning, Supervisors, Administrator. My name is Rebecca Rowan. I'm the Register and Probate. I will start us off on a positive note by saying that the Circuit Court at this time does not anticipate any additional budget needs in 2024. We're going to maintain the status quo, business as usual. Thank you.
Clerk of Courts. Oh, no, it just ended. That's over.
What?
Go ahead, Christy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Christy Severson, the Clerk of Court. Sorry, I'm a little distracted because we have jury orientation going on next door, and that's usually where I am right now. So anyway, I just have a couple items for the 2024 budget. And obviously, these are all mandated services by state statute and by Supreme Court rules, so it's not something that I have a choice on whether or not we have to pay. So, but I just wanted to give you an update. Court-appointed attorney fees, there was a significant increase from 2021 to 2022, about a 36% increase, $96,000. But I can attest that $30,000 of that was just for one case, for an individual who had multiple needs and hired and fired multiple attorneys that were appointed by the court. Likely we'll not see reimbursement for that, but on the plus side is typically we are at about an 86% overall reimbursement for that expense item. The reason for court-appointed attorneys is a person does not qualify for a public defender, or there is difficulty in hiring a public defender timely. So that's when court-appointed attorneys are needed. And we all know the status of the public defender's office right now. I think it's getting better, but for the past couple of years, it has been very difficult to get public defenders here. We had 536 requests for court-appointed attorneys last year. We already have 130 so far just in the first quarter of this year. To compare, I believe in 2000, less than 5 years ago, we were at about 300 or so. So almost close to doubling. And we recouped last year about $250,000 for court-appointed attorneys. Now, granted, the majority of these people are on payment plans, so that money comes in slowly. These could have been debts that accrued several years ago, and they're just starting to pay off, but that's the kind of money we're getting on an annual basis. The other item is interpreter costs, which also increased significantly. Rare languages has now become a new thing. I procured 9 different languages just for last year. I had 130 requests, or interpreters came in 130 times last year. The year before, we had 95. I didn't look at the numbers yet for this first quarter, but I can only see that increasing. And again, on the plus side, we do get reimbursement from the state for interpreter costs, and that's based on a formula that the state has developed. The past 2 years, we received about $13,000 each year. So hopefully we're able to keep that amount coming in. The last item I'll talk about, which I've talked about the past couple of years, is staffing. Since the referendum did not pass, as you all know, we did have 2 court clerk positions on that referendum. Our workload and caseload continues to increase, especially in the criminal division. Last year, we were at 5.12 judicial need. We have 4 judges and 2 court commissioners that handle that, but then I have to staff that as well. So that's all the information I have for you. If you have questions, please let me know.
Supervisor Cook.
So there you go. So with the things you just described, can you estimate what the cost would be for those, the increase in fees or interpreter costs, positions?
Positions that I don't know.
Yeah, so the positions are roughly $100,000 is what I budget for a position. A family health plan's $25,000. And then the court appointed, I'm estimating anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000. Interpreters is less than 50. So really, if it's less than 50, it drops off my radar as, you know, not as consequential. So that's basically my threshold is 50,000.
Okay.
So that's the items I'm particularly looking for.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Christy.
Thank you. Did you have a question? No?
Patty's up.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Patty Schachner. I'm the Chief Medical Examiner. First off, we're not looking for anything new in the budget. What we want is the budget to stay the same and to do things new in the office. Since 2006, we've had a 207% increase in our workload and a 300% increase in fees that we have collected. We would like that to stay with the medical examiner's office so that we can hire transition our part-time program coordinator into a full-time chief of investigations. With our CAT scan machine, we've already saved over $80,000 in autopsy fees, so we don't want that money to be taken away from us in that. So that's kind of what we're looking at. It's really just a reallocating of funds, and then also in giving pay increases to staff. We have not had a raise. As you all know, we are contract employees. We have not had a raise since 2016. So it's really reallocating what we already have. Any questions?
Supervisor Carlson.
So you're able to give raises if we don't take money away, is what you're saying?
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Penny. Phil Gully, our Justice Services Director.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. So Phil Gully from Justice Support. So our ask for 24 is 2 positions that we currently have. We have 2 pretrial case managers that are currently ARPA funded. Those funds are set to expire at the end of December. So pretrial services, so just as a quick refresher, if the judges order conditions of bond for somebody to be released from jail, we supervise those. We have 3 case managers, so 2 of those are the ones that we hope to have funded moving forward starting in 24. If we look at some of the work that they do and cost savings, that's one way to look at this. So it costs roughly $8 to supervise somebody on pretrial release in the community, as opposed to keeping them in jails about $60 a day. So there's a considerable cost savings there by offering this. One of the big things that our folks do are pretrial risk assessments. So the public safety assessment is a tool that we use. In the first quarter of 23, so January to the end of March, we did about 100 of these. We served a total of roughly 200 clients. When we look at the intention of bail in the state of Wisconsin, it's kind of twofold. So it's return to court as well as public safety. We have a return to court appearance of 96%, which is quite high. Our arrest-free rate is 93%, also really solid. And then our violent arrest-free rate is 100%. So we're meeting those goals. Of course, we want to continue to make sure those numbers stay there or move up. Two other things that our case managers do that go beyond compliance with bond. The first is actually generates revenue for us. It's we run a cognition group, a changing criminal thinking airs on Wednesday evenings. We have a contract with the Department of Corrections that generates revenue. So we are really, really happy about that. And then we do risk assessments for the diversion program for the district attorney's office. We provide those solely in our department. Our case managers do those. And we did in 2022 150 of those. Any questions?
Phil, just to clarify again, the two employees that you're seeking are currently on the staff, and they're being funded through the ARPA funds that we approved 2 years ago. And to those two employees, as I understand it, would represent about 40% of your staff.
That's correct.
And so you're just asking that they be continued, and if the money is not provided, they would have to be released at the end of the year.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Just, guess the same question, is from a cost perspective for those two employees, do we know?
Yeah, it's just over $150,000 for those two current positions.
For both positions?
For both combined,
Okay.
yep.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil. Department up is the district attorney, Carl Anderson.
Morning, everyone. So for our office, the biggest priority is a new attorney and corporation counsel. The reason is, with that new attorney, they would take over the CHIPS caseload, the child protection caseload, which frees up almost a full caseload of a prosecutor and frees up a legal assistant. For the last couple years, our office has asked for another legal assistant. This would essentially accomplish that, because one legal assistant, that's a full caseload for them to handle all the CHIPS cases. As you all know, I think I've talked about it before, there's a news article on it. We're one of the most understaffed for prosecutors' offices in the state. We're in like the bottom 20% as needing more prosecutors, so that would be a huge benefit to get that caseload off of our assistant DA's caseload also. I know it's not going to happen, but I'll talk about it. So when it does happen, another need we have is diversion. We're currently at capacity essentially for diversion caseload. Diversion there's two forms really. We have one where it's low risk to reoffend offenders, first-time offenders. We give them the chance to avoid a criminal conviction if they comply with supervision. It's kind of like probation, but through our office. And then we have ones for people to avoid their first felony conviction, but they'll also be on probation on misdemeanors. And so far, we have had to become more picky on who we offer diversions for, just because the 2.5 staff we have already have full caseloads. We've shortened agreements so that people get off of it sooner. So far we haven't gotten to the point, but it will get there, that we have to turn people away from the program that we would like to put into it. And then we have to either decide of just giving them the break without the supervision, which we don't want to do because we want to make sure they get the treatment or services they need, or we have to stick them with the conviction because we don't have the staff to monitor additional caseload in the diversion program. And then also, I still would love an investigator, but the priority for our office is that corporation counsel gets a new attorney. I mean, that's a huge deal for us. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I think I've spoken about it a lot at previous committee meetings. So
I would only ask if I could turn to the corporate counsel and just if you had a quick comment on how that would benefit your office by also benefiting the district attorney's office.
Yes, and I can go out of order if that's okay. I can talk about it now. So a new assistant corporation counsel position would be approximately $150,000. Of that, $35,000 would be reduced from the district attorney's budget because they have a part-time individual that prosecutes CHIPS cases. And then also the Department of Health and Human Services is reimbursed from the state of Wisconsin approximately 33% of the work that is done on CHIPS cases. So I estimated about $40,000. That wouldn't come to the Corp Council budget, but would come to the county in terms of reimbursement for the prosecution of those cases. So approximately $75,000 net for a new attorney to be added to our office. This position would actually benefit, in my opinion, 4 different departments. As District Attorney Anderson indicated, it would benefit his department by having that entire caseload in the Corporation Counsel office. It would also assist the judges in having consistency with staff attorneys who will be handling the cases. There would be one attorney primarily assigned to all the CHIPS cases, so all the judges would get used to that attorney, what the recommendations are, how that individual prosecutes cases. So that would be beneficial, hopefully, to move those cases quicker through the court system and obtain permanency for families sooner. It will also help Children's Services and DHHS, as they would have a consistent individual responsible for CHIPS cases that would be solely responsible for just CHIPS and termination of parental rights. They would not have any other duties in the office. And so right now I'm probably working, I'd say 15, 20 hours a week on CHIPS cases, just because we're going through this JET initiative. We're trying to work on how to better the cases, the process through the court system. So that would also free up some of my time from handling those cases because there would be one attorney responsible for those cases. It would also allow us to prosecute termination of parental rights cases more efficiently. Those are the product, basically, of a CHIPS case. So then that attorney would not have to learn the case from scratch in order to file a TPR. Hopefully, we will process those TPRs quicker. Those TPR cases are also reimbursed by the state of Wisconsin for our time at 66%. If I'm saying that correctly. And so that would also bring in additional revenues the more TPR cases we can process. So all in all, it would be beneficial for numerous departments for the county. But most importantly, it will be beneficial for the children that we are trying to obtain permanence for. Some of them are in out-of-home placements for a very long time because cases are not being processed as quickly as maybe they should be. That's something we're working on with the state initiative. But I think this new position would help that also. And if we have children in, permanence sooner, that will reduce the costs for foster home placements, other treatment placements. So it would be beneficial and hopefully reduce costs. I don't have any idea how much costs would be reduced there, but that's always the hope, is that children are out of the foster home system and either back with their parents or in an adoptive home quicker.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions, Supervisor Shirley?
Can I just make a clarification that moving forward, because it sounds like clerk of courts, justice support, and corp counsel, those 3 positions that we're talking about were in the referendum money that we were talking about. So when we move forward and talking about positions, if we can mark those as part of that, I think that would help everybody.
Yeah, but part of the exercise, I think, will be prioritization. So is this position more important than that position? Because at some point, we run out of money, whether it's cash reserves or it's new money coming in. At some point, the money runs out. So it's good to establish where the priority is for each of those. So I know I'll fund as many as we can, but when it's out, it's out.
Our next speaker is the Director of Child Support, Lisa Plunkett. Lisa?
Good morning. Mine's pretty short. We were awarded 2 federal grants. The Safe Access for Victims Economic Security SAVES grant. In Wisconsin, it's known as Wisconsin Network for Safety, to work with domestic violence within the Child Support Agency and the courts and turning point and so on. So we received a grant for Wisconsin. The second grant was for working with hospitals and clinicians in regarding to paternity establishment and the voluntary paternity acknowledgement, and getting some documentation out to the public on that. So we have some changes in our office, although it's not going to cost anything. I would be seeking a specialist position in 2024, so long as the governor's budget stays as is. If they have additional funding, GPR funding for the Child Support Agency. And so if that goes through, I would seek for a specialist position for that. Other than that, the only other minor increase would be staff development, taking on any child support related training for Corporation Counsel.
Are there any questions for Lisa? Thank you very much. Sheriff Knutson, report on the Sheriff's Office.
Good morning. Yeah, with the non-passing of the referendum, that puts us back into, as I mentioned, a public protection the other morning, that once the vote tally was in, that didn't alleviate our need for staff. So we still have that need. And as we look at prioritizing some of those staff needs, in that referendum, we had asked for several things: patrol officers, jail staff, and investigators. And if asked to rank those, it's probably going to be the investigations first. That'll be the most impactful for that caseload, some of those critical cases, the ICAC cases. Patrol is second on that priority list. And then the jail staff. They're kind of set right now as far as their duties. Patrol, we never know what we're going to get, but the investigations, we want to ensure that victims are responded to and their cases are worked on in a timely manner. So those are those priorities for staffing that I'm hoping we can have some assistance with. I do appreciate all the support from many of the board members on that staffing thoughts and processes. But I will also say we have some very good partners that we work alongside with throughout the county, whether it be highway or juvenile services, CPS. We have a lot of good partners, so I want to make sure that we all work well together. So the other big ones for us are going to be really the computer forensics and the computer subscriptions, and the when we do our downloads and our forensic lab and our computers and our radios have subscriptions. That's going to be another very large, that we look at, and I'm including dispatch in that as well. All the subscriptions, all the upgrades that take place, the numbers surprise me as well, but where we pay over $700,000 in subscriptions to keep your radio systems and your towers and your computers and the squads and those forensic lab things. And the third, which is probably more of a mandatory one, it's going to be the meal contract in the jail. Because of that, everything going up, we had to restructure for this year, and then the contractual 3% increase next year. I put that in the 40 to 50,000 range for what that meal contract is going to go up for 2024. So those are my big three that we're hoping for some movement on. So thank you. And any questions?
Supervisor Long.
Yeah, can you kind of clarify for us in terms of adding deputies, what works and what doesn't work? Like one maybe wouldn't work, but this isn't twos or fours, or what do we really need to consider in terms of adding multiple deputies?
So when we had gone into the referendum, we looked for 8 deputies. And I'll talk about those because those are probably the easiest two. We work 12-hour shifts. That would give us 2 per shift. If we got 1 deputy, we would probably make that a power car and try to cover 2 different shifts and look for our most active times of the day to keep that 1 patrol deputy adding on. And really one of our busy times, it's the afternoons. From that 3 to 6 p.m., they're just getting slammed. And we have 1 or 2 power shift cars out during those times. Obviously, as we look at caseload 4 or 5 in the morning, not as much. But then you get a blizzard and it's as much. So we try to push where we can. But if we had 1 or 2, they would probably become power cars. And the investigator, that's just, yeah, they're buried right now, and, yeah, so.
Sheriff, at the recent PPJ meeting, you gave us some rather startling statistics on the response of your office during the recent blizzard 2 weeks ago. Could you just share what the rough numbers were, if you can remember them?
I have my computer, if you give me.
Just the rough numbers.
No, I'd actually like to. One thing that I did not see as I scrolled down further was more numbers that Terry Anderson gave me, and it was the number of calls and radio transmissions to the dispatch center between midnight and the next day at noon, April 1st. And they were astounding numbers. I was shocked.
As I recall, they were in the hundreds.
It was hundreds for calls, and if I recall correctly, it was over for radio transmissions, and that's calls coming in, calls going out. Tow trucks, fire departments, it was over 1,000 transmissions to all the entities.
And that was just over that 24-hour period.
It was over, I believe it was a 12-hour period.
12-hour period.
Midnight when the storm hit, and noon when it kind of cleared up a little bit. It was amazing numbers. Everybody was busy.
I think we can leave it at that. That's fine. We don't have you go back to your computer. Are there any other questions for the sheriff? Supervisor Cook.
This is just me with a kind of a broken record question. I just would like to know, when we have positions, how much they're going to cost. So going forward, so you don't have to keep calling on me, if we can find out how much positions would be cost, or the increases for, I mean, thank you, Sheriff, for the estimate of the 40 to 50,000 for the meal contract increase, but things like that, it would just be useful to know what our costs were for 2024.
So every position, it's either 100,000 or 150,000, depending on the positions. All of the sheriff's positions would fall in the $150,000 character level. $100,000 is more support staff level. So just think about 100 to 150,000 for every body that's been asked for.
Supervisor Hanson.
I know we want to take care of the department, but we don't want to create a structural deficit. That's going to hurt the department as well as the rest of the county government. Could you comment on that? I mean, responsible funding of the department. We want to do public protection, but we want to be able to pay for it, right?
Well, I'll leave all the funding up to you individuals, but I will say, to hire an officer and them not know if they have a job in 3 years, they ain't coming here. So we want to make something sustainable. But, again, I leave all of that, the numbers up to you folks.
Supervisor Burning.
So just because we use these dollars specifically either this year, next year, or the year after, whatever it ends up, does that mean that's the only way we can fund those positions, or are there other ways to fund that in the future, vis-a-vis new revenue from net new construction, increased sales tax, et cetera? That doesn't, just because we use dollars in this way, doesn't necessarily mean an officer or a deputy will not have a job in 3 or 4 years, correct?
Yeah, we did something similar with the ARPA dollars. They're one-time dollars. It's cash that's sitting in the bank. We're drawing that down, but we're paying for positions. There's several positions in HHS. There's 2 positions that you heard about in Justice Support Services where that funding's coming to an end. So we're at the point now where we're making a decision whether to lay those employees off or to change the funding source. So that would be the same thing that would happen under Supervisor Shirley's plan.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
We've already heard from the Corporation Counsel, but I'd ask Heather if there's anything she'd like to add to what she said earlier.
The only other things I can think of is we haven't added an attorney to our office since 2008, so 15 years. We've have an increasing caseload. Prosecution of CHIPS cases is a mandatory service. Either the district attorney's office or the corporation counsel office has to represent the public interest under the statute, and so this is a service that we have to provide to the county. It can either be done in the district attorney's office or the corporation counsel office. Since we handle the other kind of social services cases, Chapter 51s, which is mental commitments, guardianship cases, I think it's just, it would work well and flow well with the CHIPS cases being prosecuted by our office. So I don't have any other increased costs or any additions besides the attorney position.
Any questions for the corporate counsel? Seeing none, I think the next item is administration, and I think that would be the administrator.
Yep, that'd be me. So nothing under the administration department, but at this point, I'll take the time to talk about health insurance and employee compensation, what those costs look like. So on health insurance, we see an inflationary factor of anywhere from 5 to 8% a year of health insurance inflation. If you do nothing, you're going to go up 5 to 8% a year. We have a good trend going right now, a fairly healthy group. We're self-insured. So I think we'll be on the lower end of that range. But basically, at a 2.5% increase in premiums would be $250,000, and that means some reduction in benefits to the employee's health insurance plan. At $500,000, that would be a 5% increase. That would be the level you'd have to fund it to have no reduction in the employee's benefits. So I would say you should be looking at somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 for health insurance. On employee compensation, a 1% COLA costs $300,000. A step increase, which averages about 2% then, is about $600,000. So whether it's a step or whether it's a COLA or whether it's both, it's $300,000, $600,000, $900,000. I mean, that's where the numbers fall for compensation.
Questions for the supervisor? For the administrator. I was just thinking, Ken, we had the two positions with the Justice Support Services. We had possibly an investigator for the sheriff, and the CHIPS position. We've already talked about 4 positions. We're let alone the other positions that we're talking about, we're getting really close to the $1 million. You just suggested about $1 million in costs alone for the COLA and a step increase. So
you're saying we should stop now?
Well, I'm saying that we've had some very thoughtful presentations on the need for positions, and we're just about out of money before you spoke.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm aware. This is what I deal with every day, every year.
Any other questions for the administrator? Supervisor Hanson.
It's more of a thought than a question. We have been wrestling with turnover and a hard job market for a couple of few years. So when we're talking about the COLA, we're talking about step increases, I think it's important for us all to remember the flip side of that coin, right? That taking care of our employees is vital in this job market, and with the high cost of training, that there's a lot of hidden costs with that too. Not to mention the human factor of how much we need to appreciate the people who really bust their tails every single day to make St. Croix County the best place in the state to live. So as we consider where we need to, whack this budget apart, let's remember that there's a value to that. Thank you for listening.
Chairman Long.
Yeah, just also to build on your comments, Supervisor Hanson, one of our highest priorities last year was employee compensation. And I think it was an average of about 5% last year. So we did try last year to make up some lost ground and really make sure that we're compensating employees appropriately. So that was a priority last year. So just consider that.
If there's no other questions, we'll turn to our county clerk, Christine.
Good morning, everyone. Much like the Register and Probate, County Clerk's Office does not have any additional requests for the 2024 budget year.
That's the kind of report we like to hear. Any questions for our county clerk? Seeing none, we'll move to the next item, Human Resources.
I'm on the same page, so we won't be requesting any funds for 2024 to be added to the human resource budget. Small pennies, I asked for $20,000 for the 2023 budget for a wage study. So 2024, I won't need that. You can have that $20,000 back to spend elsewhere. But as Supervisor Hanson said too, I guess from an HR standpoint, the push for me would be compensation and benefits. Really helps with recruiting, retention, employee morale. So that would be kind of where I would want those funds to go. I know new positions are also valid and super important. I know overworked staff, that is another main reason for some of our turnover. So it's a tough call, right? I don't want to be in your guys' shoes. Any questions?
Seeing none, thank you. The next will be our Director of Information Technology.
Good morning. I'm John Allegro. I'm the IT Director here at St. Croix County. For 2024, the only thing that we're looking for is operating expense to cover the increases in software subscriptions. We typically see between 7 and 15%, depending on the vendor. We have an operating budget for software right now at about $700,000, so that puts us right around the $100,000 mark in an increase in uncontrollable increases in our operating budget. Not asking for any bodies. We're actually fully staffed this as of March 13th. For the first time in about 9 months, we were able to get all our positions filled, and I don't think we have a position request for, I think, 2 or 3 years, looking at our long-term plan. So.
Questions for John?
Thank you.
Thank you. Our Finance Director.
Finance, Dustin's not here this morning. He had another engagement. There's no request for the Finance Department.
Thank you. Our County Treasurer.
Good morning, everybody. So same as some of the other departments, I'm not really requesting or anticipating any increases in our budget or changes that are significant or noteworthy. The one thing I would mention is we do have our tax collection software has a new version available that we will have to transition to at some point, either in 2024 or 2025. It is completely integrated with the property listers land information program, which will also transition, so we'll do that at the same time. I think Ellen has a little more detail and might speak to that too in her notes. There will be an implementation fee of maybe, were you thinking like 25,000?
Yes, it'll be 25,000. It's not optional. The company was bought out by another company, and we have this year, next year, and at the latest we could do it is 2025. Otherwise, we're buying a new operating system. So it doesn't, you have to pay one way or the other. And also the annual operating fees that we pay. Denise pays 35%, my department pays 65% of the cost of it, of this software, and you have to have it to collect taxes, you have to have it to assess valuation. It's not a choice, kind of like John was saying. So the fees are also going up. It's going to be about $24,000 a year, an increase of $1,000 a year for the first 5 years. So it's not that much, and we do have a grant we're going to apply for next year. If we don't get the grant, which we're hopeful, but if we don't get it, then absolutely by 2025 we'll need another $25,000. So we can put it off. Denise would prefer to do it this year, just FYI. So
yeah, I've postponed it a couple of years already. So
yeah. So any questions on that one?
I see no questions. Thank you very much. Next will be our Department Director for Facilities.
Good morning. Taylor Mabus with Facilities Director. I look at and see no additional requests. The one thing we are going to end up doing is a contract cleaning this year. I'll know those numbers beginning of May. Otherwise, I see no other changes. Obviously, there's going to be some electrical increases, gas increases, and water and sewer with the building expansion, but that's already been some added in to the budget from my predecessor and Ken. So we should be good for this next year other than that contracted cleaning.
Any questions for Facilities? Thank you very much, Taylor. We're about 3/4 of the way through our presentation. No, come on up, Robbie. We're about 3/4 of the way through our presentations, so just guessing a little bit, depending on questions that might come up. We should be done just in about 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll start the exercise that Ken can direct. So I'll call on our highway director.
I hate to do it, but I'm probably going to slow you down just a little bit. On the good side, Highway has not requested a new staff member. In my 6-year tenure, we will continue that trend next year. We will not be asking for additional staff. As far as revenue is the one thing I'd like to highlight to the county board. Depending on what the governor and the legislature agree on as far as fiscal budget, you hear a lot of comments about a 4% increase in general transportation aids. I want the board to understand that because that's what gets put out doesn't mean we receive a 4%. GTA is a complicated formula. It's based on 6-year average cost. It's based on what other counties are doing. To give you an example, we've had a GTA increase last year, and our general transportation aids actually went down because it's based on what other counties spend. So I want the county board to realize that doesn't translate into an increase in revenue for St. Croix. On the other good side of the revenue, we've been very aggressive and we've been very successful in the grant programs. We've brought multi-million dollars over the last 3 years into the county. What I can tell you is that doesn't replace structural revenue. We're going to continue to be aggressive. I promise that. We will chase every dollar I can chase, but that has limits. So what we've seen on the expense side is some inflation that's really challenged our department. I can show graphs. I saved the graphs today, but whether we're talking salt, hot mix, we have 335 miles of county highway. If we're not paving 14 miles every year, we are going backwards. And what I can tell you is in my 6 years, we've only hit that goal once. So I want everyone to be aware as far as revenue goes, we are really challenged and we will continue to do well with what we have. Our ask is not going to be an increase in operations, but what I can tell you is over the last 6 years, we really have not had an operational increase. And our purchasing power has really been reduced over the last 6 years. And that's just a direct, honest answer to you. I wish I could provide you a different answer, but that's the truth, and I think I need to give it to you. Our project costs have seen increase, and the other thing challenging this county that I want you to be aware from expense is growth and congestion. Right now, with the forecasts, I've seen anywhere from 30 to 50,000 over the next 20 years. The city of New Richmond alone has over 500 acres in preliminary plat. Growth comes challenge. We have a number of intersections. I'll highlight County A and McCutcheon Road. That's going to be about a $1.7 million project next year. That's over half our construction budget if I can't find a grant to offset that. And I can tell you the rest of the counties are getting better at this game too. So we got to keep getting better, but it's a challenge. And I really want to highlight what that means. This winter has been tragic for us. We've already spent our winter maintenance budget. So what I can tell you is we had a K-bridge up in New Richmond that was bid. It came in $400,000 over the estimated price. We delayed a project. When I say cut, that's an imaginary term because that bad road stays bad. We delayed a project to offset that, to keep that bridge project in place. We have already spent our winter maintenance budget. I'm looking at what we can do, and to be honest with you, our only option right now is to delay another project. And we're looking at creative options, but here's the death spiral. That bad road requires us to go out and spend $10,000 to $40,000 to make sure the traveling public isn't popping tires. That's the worst money we spend. We spend the best money when we take care of our good roads. And you have to let some roads go into that cycle. Now, unfortunately, we can't just abandon those roads. Another good example is Double C, just north of Richmond. It decided this year it had enough. It gave up. There's 2 miles up there. That's going to be an emergency project in which we shift funds from one project to another. So we're doing our best. We will continue to do our best, but I want you to understand the pressure we're at. I also want to highlight in the last 30 days we've had 5 resignations, all younger employees, all cited compensation as a reason that they went back into the private sector. That's 6% of our workforce right there, and in the last 6 years we've had over 50% turnover. Now 24 of those have been retirement, but when you start to do the math, we're at 50%. Training costs money. We're going to continue to try to stabilize. We do a good job with that, but that's some of the challenges that we're facing within highway. Are there any questions? I wore the yellow shirt to bring some sunshine. I feel like I brought the doom and gloom on the end. The sheriff already made fun of me for the yellow shirt. No one has to. No one else has to. Are there any questions?
Seeing none, well, thank you, and we know this has been an incredible winter, and I think everybody's expressed that to you and your crew several times, and we do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next is Health and Human Services, and Bob Ratt.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the annoying director that put together a presentation. I'll try and move through it quickly, though, but most of HHS budget pressures come in the form of personnel and service demands. So looking forward to 2024, we see an unprecedented increase in certain areas of HHS where service demands are exceeding our capacity to provide care. So in this overview slide, I just wanted to point out those three areas that we're primarily concerned about. In children's services, where out-of-home placements are, in 2022, we're at 116, which is a record number. Costs for out-of-home placements were at $328,000 in the first quarter of this year, up $35,000 from the same time last year. And there's been over a 25 to 30% increase in adult protective services in the past 4 years. And the other item on here that I wanted to focus on was emergency detention placements, where we spent a little over $800,000 for emergency placements just at Winnebago Hospital last year. So we look for any way that we can, much as Robbie said, any other way we can find money, we try and bring it in for revenue. We look at grants. Grants are a terrible way to fund healthcare, but we look at grants that help support our mission and vision, and we have to use staff time to apply for them. We go after them, though. We find efficiencies through integration with divisions, through billing, revenue recapture, and trying to find efficiencies in our billing process. We always bill Medicaid, commercial insurance, we charge client fees in some cases, and utilize all state and federal funding. State advocacy at the state level, I think, is important, and we've been at the Capitol this year. Some of the board members and myself advocating for funding in key areas that we are insufficiently funded. So I included some position requests in here that don't require tax levy or only require a minimal increase in tax levy. I did that just to demonstrate how we're trying to cover some of these areas of high need without using tax levy dollars. Some of these positions we couldn't avoid but to ask for additional spending. This first position would cover the birth to 3 and children's long-term support, children's long-term CLTS, children's long-term support services. The position would be divided between birth to 3 and CLTS, and it's all Medicaid reimbursable. So we would add a position there to help address the out-of-home placement and, the needs of those populations in both birth to 3 and CLTS, and kids with complex needs and developmental needs and disabilities, and an increasing number of kids in those areas, 58% increase in CLTS and a 49% increase in birth to 3 in 2022, since 2020, I'm sorry. The next position is in children's services as well. It's a program support specialist. This position we have 2 people that do this work, and they provide court-ordered supervised family interactions in the home, but the demand or the number of kids and families that need these services exceeds our capacity with 2 full-time staff. So we have to contract with an outside provider to help us with this, oftentimes evenings, weekends, and that sort of thing. The cost for that contracted service is $106,000 last year. So we are asking if we can hire a position, an additional county position to serve in this capacity. The cost would be around, it's about $80,000 with salary and fringe, but we'll say $100,000. But it still would be offset by the reduction in the contract that we're currently paying for to provide this care. So we don't anticipate a budget impact or a very minimal budget impact if we're able to hire somebody to reduce this contracted service amount. We do need, we need another full-time initial assessment case manager, a social worker, and children's services. CHIPS cases are 116, as I said, in 2022. We have 4 staff who have left in the last year and a half, primarily citing work demands and stress as the reason. When we hire a new staff, it takes approximately 6 months to train them. It's a highly technical and complicated area. So there's a cost involved in the turnover that we're seeing. We have to rely on tax levy for this. So it's $100,000 for this position. But my staff are begging me for help. So these are mandated services. We have to provide them. Same with ongoing child protection case manager. Again, their caseloads are about twice of what the state caseload study recommends, at 25 to 30 kids each. It's a mandated service. Turnover, again, in this area is related to stress and workload. And we can slightly offset the cost for this position through targeted safety and support funds, but those funds are not guaranteed year to year. So if we get those funds, we can help to offset some of that $100,000 salary and fringe. We're able to, we're looking at a position in our behavioral health division that would serve comprehensive community services, CCS clients. What we're looking at here is a therapist within our behavioral health division that could provide group therapy for youth with mental health and addiction needs. There's a gap or a gap in service delivery in our community serving young people who have addiction and mental health needs. We can't contract for it because there's such a long wait list. If we can have a position within behavioral health, they can bill Medicaid through CCS. They can bill Medicaid and fund the position that way. But it would be a way to provide mental health and addiction care for young people in group settings or through mental health, through therapy, all billable to Medicaid, so we don't anticipate a budget impact if we were to add this position. Adult protective services is another area that's, as our population grows and ages, is just increasing considerably. This takes up a significant amount of time from our behavioral health supervisor in managing these cases, from our corporation counsel, from a number of people. The number of adult protection cases have increased about 30% since 2022 or since 2019. Any disabled or vulnerable adult can be served through APS. And these are also mandated services that we don't have a payment source for. What we're looking at doing, though, is shifting one FTE from another area of behavioral health and moving it to APS. That would not require additional funding. What we do, though, is by taking that position out of our substance use disorder area and putting it in APS, is we lose a little revenue that position would have generated. We think, in talking with Char Lopez and our deputy director, we think we can make up that difference, though, in other ways through efficiencies and service integration and stuff. So hopefully we can address some of the needs in APS without costing a significant additional increase in expense. We also want to reclassify one of our existing positions to a lead worker position in APS. Again, given the demands and the time demands and the complicated nature of these cases, having a lead worker to assist the supervisor would just help to triage and manage those cases more effectively, provide more a more responsive kind of service to the people that need it. Minimal budget impact there. It would just be increasing that position by a grade to account for the added responsibilities. Where we really have a need here, and this is in the ADRC, is for an information and assistance worker, again, due to the aging population and the increase in population in St. Croix County. We were looking at staffing patterns for what other counties have, the complements that other counties have to address this sort of need in their counties of like sizes. And we found that our ADRC has been understaffed really since its inception. We haven't kept up with the growing population and the needs of our population. We're staffed at about a third of what some other ADRCs are. Kristen Newton has put together an analysis on that. I can show you if you're interested. But the bottom line is we need an additional position in this area very badly. Half of that roughly would be offset by state and federal matching dollars. So we're looking at a $50,000 ask there for state tax levy. And then this is another area where we have 209 volunteers working for the ADRC or entities, volunteering time for the ADRC that adds up to about a fiscal savings of about $381,000 for the work that these volunteers do. We don't have anyone to manage all those volunteers. It's sort of divided up between whoever can assist. So we're asking for a 0.6 position there that would be about $20,000. Some of that cost would be, the reason it's only $20,000 is some of that cost to be offset by moving from a kitchen cooking model to a catered meal model in Deer Park. So we're reducing our cooking staff there by 1 FTE. And I think that was it for HHS. So it's roughly, I understand the budget pressures and the limitations on what we can hope for here. I feel compelled to advocate on behalf of my staff who are just begging me for help. And I have to show you the realities of the needs that are increasing, the costs involved, and the likelihood that this trend is going to continue, at least for the time being. I also wanted to show you what we're trying to do about it to avoid using tax levy and to address these high priority needs. I'll stop here because I think the next section is related to the healthcare campus. If there's any questions.
I had a couple questions here. Supervisor Van Summer.
I'm sure you have this. You have, you talked about what I'm going to call mandated services and then ancillary services. Do you have a dollar fee on each of those two for your desires? How much is mandated? How many dollars do you want for mandated things that the state mandates? How many dollars for the ancillary ones that are not mandated?
It's about $250,000 for mandated services and about $50,000 for services that aren't. I'd have to check that, but that's pretty close.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no other questions in that area, you can continue on. Oh, I'm sorry. Supervisor Ramberg.
Are any of these positions able to assist other departments like the judges and the justice services?
Yes, it's a good question. Yes, they are to an extent. The difficulty with some of these very specialty positions is that the regulations and the requirements for how we use them, so to speak, in the services they provide it's very specific, very regulated. But of course, we interact with justice support services, with sheriff's office, with all other departments that might have a relationship to these to the populations that we serve. We try our very best to reach out and work with other departments and other entities as much as we can, so that that position has the most impact possible.
Supervisor Hanson.
I don't understand how eliminating 1 FTE doing food preparation is going to be offset by catering meals for the dining sites. Are you going to increase the price of those meals at the dining sites?
There's less of a cost for catered meals than there is for hiring someone to cook them. Yeah, it's not a great deal, but it would be enough to offset some of the cost of the position we were asking for there. Yeah.
Supervisor Shirley.
I hate to keep going back to it, but in the referendum, I think it was your department was asking for 2 mental health co-responders. Are we no longer asking for those?
Well, I would like to ask for those. That's at this point another 100,000 probably of costs that we don't have funding for. What we are doing, though, I'll tell you, is at the state level, we're advocating very strongly for these kinds of positions to be funded in other ways through crisis services so that we don't have to continually look for ways to sustain them. And that does resonate with, in a bipartisan way. So we'll see what happens with the state budget in June, but hopefully that will be maybe a part of what new funding through the Year of Mental Health will involve.
And they're funded through 2024 with ARPA dollars currently.
Yeah, that's
how come they're not on this year's request.
Right, but those 2 positions you were estimating at 100,000? Each?
Each, and they're funded through the end of 2024 at this point. Okay.
We can move on to Health Center campus.
Okay, the only thing I wanted to point out about the health care campus is that it's not that we need new positions, we need workers to fill vacant positions there. The board recently passed a step increase for CNA positions, certified nursing assistant positions, and that step increase helped our recruiting ability and probably our retention in that staffing area. The real challenge here is statewide. The demographics of the workforce have changed since the pandemic, especially where those lower wage positions like CNA positions, the workers haven't come back from the pandemic that left as a result of the pandemic, and we're just not seeing as much interest in that kind of those kinds of positions. So we end up having to reach out to temporary staffing agencies and contract with them to have enough staff to keep our census at a level that makes profit. So we're not losing money at the healthcare campus, but this cost associated with temporary staffing agencies was $430,000 last year. That's not on top of everything else. That's money we would have paid our staff if we had them. So it's just a higher cost. We're like paying more expensive staff to come in and work than we would otherwise if we had county employees. But we're seeing some of that turn around a little bit. And talking with Sandy, I mentioned this just because this would be something going forward that we'll see in our budget when we review it at the HHS board, that you'll see that cost associated with these temporary agency costs. And that'll probably continue into next year, although hopefully less. So, I mean, that's all I had. Again, I just wanted to wrap it up and say we're trying our best to integrate services, find efficiencies. We're trying to advocate for crisis stabilization, regional crisis stabilization services that would help reduce those emergency detention costs and better treat the people in our communities that need mental health or addiction care. We're going to continue with grant writing. All of the funding that we currently have access to, we'll try and utilize as efficiently as we can. So that's all I had.
Supervisor Hanson.
Is there a risk of being cited by the state for not providing the mandatory services if we don't fund these positions you're asking for?
Yeah, it's possible. The state tries to work with counties that are really struggling in certain areas. We've seen other counties that had no one in their children's services area or only one employee, and it was due to losing staff, right? Not being able to find anyone to do the work. And that's a very dire situation, and at that point the state tries to step in and help. Other counties try and help, but we're also we're all at capacity, so it's really difficult for counties to even help each other at this point, and we're competing for the same people. It's possible, and yeah, I mean that could happen. I'll put it that way. And at this point, we're not faced with that, but I'm looking ahead a year or two. Sorry. Oh, escape button. Sorry.
Supervisor Osnes.
Do we know, Bob, what the cost is when we have to take somebody down to Winnebago, which would include, our costs, but there's a cost of 2 deputies going down to pick somebody up or taking them down there? What is the cost for that? Do you have any idea?
It looks like the sheriff's department, and I could be wrong, it looked like it was about a $40,000 cost last year associated with transportation to Winnebago. That's rough. I don't think that takes into account salaries and stuff. It's probably just, I don't remember what that analysis showed, but it was around $40,000. But that's time not spent doing other things that law enforcement could be doing, Yeah.
Any questions for the director? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you very much, Bob. Just an observation, and Ken may want to jump in here. Bob mentioned a couple of times that the state legislature was considering things. There were things in the governor's budget that he proposed. And fortunately for Wisconsin, we're running a huge surplus presently. And so the numbers that I've seen are rather large that could be sent down to the local municipalities and ourselves. And of course, the legislature is considering an entirely new way of funding local government by taking 20% of the sales tax and sending it to the counties. In discussing it with the administrator and others, nobody knows really, I think at this point, what the state's going to do. And that could be hugely impactful on us as we proceed in this process. They presumably will act by June, so they can put something on the governor's desk for him to act on before the 1st of July. And that would then, depending on what they do, might impact what we do later on in our budget process. But I'll call on the administrator if he'd care to augment that.
You know, it's really the same issue. We're here to set our priorities. Where the other funding sources might come to fill out our additional needs, that can be determined. What I want to know is where the priority on the expense side is. Once I know that, we'll fill as much of it as we can through our own tax levy, through sales tax, through additional money from the state, through other ideas that we have. We'll get to the other parts, but I have to know what the priority of the budget expenses are so we can start from there. So that's the main goal for today at the end, is I want to know that.
Next is Phil Landgraf, and Veteran Service Officer.
I am going to bring the sunshine. You guys, things are so good in Veteran Services. They can't get any better. Our staff is doing great, and I'm very pleased to say that I will not be requesting anything extra. As a matter of fact, working with Bob, we're going to be actually probably, I would say, bringing some additional services, Veterans Outreach and Recovery Program. They're going to be covering a certain area of the state for veterans and helping with mental health services, and they want to come to New Richmond, so they're going to be paying potentially some rent and stuff like that. We're working on that, so we'll help pay a light bill or two with that. So things are great. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Register of Deeds.
Hi, Beth Pabst here. As always, I don't really need much from you guys. You guys have a very daunting task with all the requests received so far, so I won't be adding anything.
Any questions for Beth? Seeing none, thank you, Beth. The next item is our community development. And Alan Denzer.
So Denise and I already mentioned one item we just wanted to bring to your attention, and hopefully we can find a way to do that without any cost to the county other than ongoing increase in software. The other couple of small items that I wanted to, one big item I want to mention to you, and the NG 911 is something that takes more and more staff time from our department, keeping the address point system up to date. We do have to do that for the municipalities and also all the centerline road systems. That's all essential. The more electronic we get, the more the maps and the databases and the information we provide to the emergency dispatch center becomes more and more important. And as it takes more and more time with NG 911, it's taking away from the other work that our department has to do. And so 2024, 2025 at the latest, there's going to need to be another staff person doing GIS work. So we can maybe hold off, probably will if we have to, that's the way it works, to 2025, but that is not going to go away, and the need for it's not going to go away. The other couple other small things, I mentioned this last year when we had at this time. Every year we've been using some fund balance reserves, and those are going away in our resource management division, and that's what we've been using to fund our water quality program. The absolute minimum it needs to keep going the way we've had it with the screening and the base testing and trying to respond to other concerns people have and continuing all the education we do is $16,000 a year. And I don't know that this year will be the year where it's all gone. Ken and I haven't sat down and looked at what's left, but that is coming again. So that's not a lot of money, but I feel like it's important to let you guys know about these kind of things. And that would be about it. We always need a little to keep, as with echo what other people have said, keeping staff is hard if we don't keep salaries up and our benefits up. And so we see our turnover, and most of the time it is related to pay because our staff can go across the river to Minnesota and make a lot more money. So it's kind of a fact. So with that, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. UW Extension?
No, I don't think they'll have any.
No. Okay. And other agencies, just
Again, I don't
as a general
anticipate
topic.
any changes, at
All
least
right.
hitting my threshold level.
And capital improvements plan, Ken?
Again, not tax levy impact on capital
Okay.
improvements.
And any comments you want to make on debt service?
No, definitely not.
Okay. Well, at this point, I would then turn it over to the administrator for the next segment of the process.
All right, so
We can. Okay.
we're all going to get up and exercise here in just a second.
Ken, just before you do that, we have had a request for a short break before that. I know we're going to have a short break when we finish that, but why don't we say everybody back in their seats for sure by 10:10. Thank you. If everybody could begin to find their seats, we'll be underway in just a minute. So if we could end our conversations and find our seats, that would be great. I don't have anything to pound on. Here, give me your gavel for a second. Okay, now we'll get to the creative portion of the meeting, and I'll call on the county administrator to describe how we're going to proceed.
All right, thank you, everyone. I mic'd up here, so hopefully everyone can hear me still. So everyone was distributed $1 million in chips. There is no place to cash them in. Sorry, Supervisor Telejohn. So they're labeled. The reds are 100. That's a $100,000 chip. And the blues are 50. That's a $50,000 chip. So you have $1 million in your hand, which is about the amount of new money that's coming into the county. So with that new money, we need to establish what our priorities are. So this is what my job is every year when we put the budget together finally, is to determine what buckets we end up filling. So we have with us types of expenses. So we have some operational expenses, some variable expenses, and positions. So the first one we have is the jail meal contract. And at the end of these buckets, if I'm missing any buckets, I have a couple extra. You can tell me what to add. But we have a jail meal contract, $50,000. You really don't have much choice. I'm asking that you put a $50,000 chip into that bucket because the meal contract is going to go up. You can not vote for the operational expenses. We're still going to end up putting money into those at the end of the day. When it comes down to the real money is going to go into those because we have to. We can't not pay for things. The second one is court-appointed counsel. So in the judicial, when a defendant does not have an attorney, a public defender, they're going to appoint one for them. So they were about $100,000 over budget last year. We budget $250,000, they spent $350,000. So really, anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, depending on what you think is going to happen with public defenders. Are they going to increase the wages? Are they going to fill the vacancies? Or are they going to be continuing to run at that rate? Third bucket I have here for you is IT operating expenses. You heard John Allegro say software prices are going up. You know, it's $100,000 to cover that increase. Again, there's really no choice. We're going to pay whatever Microsoft tells us we're going to pay. The next one is community development. They have operational expenses. Ellen talked to you about some of these expenses. Some of them are just inflationary costs going up. They're things that we're going to have to do. One of the ones that we hadn't talked about is an operational expense, and that's the Sheriff's Department union contract compensation. That contract is already settled for 2024. That's the third and final year of the contract, but that's a $50,000 line item. So their expenses are going up by $50,000 to cover that union contract agreement that we have. So again, that's an increase in operational expenses that's going to be there whether you want it or not because we've already approved it. All right, now we get into the variable ones. So those are the ones that I talked about under administration. So we have health insurance. So again, health insurance, and they're labeled here. So $250,000 into that bucket means there'll be minimal cuts. $500,000 means there won't be any cuts to the health insurance benefits. And then employee compensation. So $300,000 is a 1% COLA for the employees. $600,000 is needed for a step increase. You have $1 million in your hands. You have expenses that you're going to have to pay for. We have variable expenses. Now on the other side of the table, we have the new positions that are requested. The first few are part of my recommendation. I would absolutely recommend that we fund the 2 justice support case managers. Those are existing positions. And it would be a devastating blow to the department to have that a 40% reduction in case managers. And that's $150,000. The dollar amounts are labeled on here also for you. It's $150,000 for both positions. When we budget for vacant positions, new positions, I have to estimate at the highest level. When we're paying for existing positions, and I already know the people that are sitting in those chairs, I can be a little bit more accurate. And so it's really about $160,000. I round off to $50,000 because you don't have any $10,000 chips. So it's $50,000 or $100,000. So $150,000 covers both of those case managers. The next one, and you heard the DA, he called me the first thing Wednesday morning after the referendum and goes, can we still get that CHIPS attorney? I think he really wants it. So CHIPS attorney is my recommendation. These 3 positions we absolutely should fill. They should be part of our baseline budget. From there, it becomes a little bit more subjective because I don't know if we're going to have money for some of these. But the next one is the sheriff's office. And so for the sheriff's office, I have all of them on here. It's $150,000 per position, but it's investigators, it's deputies, it's the corrections officers. Really, however much you want to put in there funds that number of positions, but then leave it up to the sheriff to determine where the priority is. Is it one investigator plus this, or is it two investigators plus this? However, he might figure best to use that resource allocation. Next one is clerk of courts. Within the referendum, there was 2 positions requested. That's $100,000 for each position. You heard Bob Rohret talk about some of the needs in Health and Human Services. There's 2 positions specifically that we have up here. One is HHS, the Adult Protective Services Case Manager, and the other one is the HHS Children's Services Ongoing Case Manager. You saw the number of cases that those employees are dealing with. They just keep increasing. We have to be able to keep pace with that. But again, it's about prioritizing because we do have a limited number of dollars. District Attorney also talked about a diversion case manager as those number of cases are increasing. And within the referendum was a District Attorney legal assistant. Maybe that one's maybe not as high of a priority now, especially if you vote for the CHIPS attorney. But these are the positions that we laid out. So before we start the exercise of voting, am I missing any buckets? I have some extra buckets if I am. But is there anything on here that we didn't have that you really think we should? If it's under $50,000, I really didn't allocate it up here. Right, silence. So what we'll do is you can all get up now. You can come around the table. You're basically voting with your $1 million. Where do you see the priorities? Where do you want to put that in? Yeah.
I question a little bit the premise. You said if we don't put money in this bucket, this goes away. We don't put money in that bucket.
Yeah.
And all I've been hearing, I've only heard once our human health service director say they're looking for efficiencies. I've heard a couple say they're looking for a grant. I've heard nothing of saying maybe we take money, where can we take money from existing things and reallocate it? Rather, I mean, we necessarily have to spend $1 million more, but I don't see anything on, I've never heard anything on where we can cut things.
Yeah. So I have up here probably $4.5 million worth of expenses. And so I have $1 million of new revenue. So what I'm doing is I'm letting you prioritize where the new money would go regarding the expenses. I think we need to go further than that $1 million, and where we go further is other ideas. Do we find additional revenue sources? Do we cut other areas of the budget in order to get there? Do we use one-time monies to get us there? There's other options, but that doesn't change how we prioritize things up here. So we're going to start from the top, and we're going to fund as far down the list as possible. And if we didn't fund something that you really want funded, then we have to continue to look for ways to get there.
Those positions that are on your side of the table there, most of those were in the referendum. Can we, just so that everybody has an idea of what, you know, not only my proposal was, but can we make a mark on every one of those that was in that so that we can get our heads around that?
Yeah, I think all but 3 of them were in the referendum. Yep. Yeah. So I'll draw a line across the bottom, signifying that it was within the referendum. So the ones marked were in the referendum. There's 3, mostly on the end there, that were not part of the referendum. And when it comes to Supervisor Shirley's idea about funding 3/4 of the positions within the referendum, not every position is created equally. I think when it goes to committee, we really should talk about, are these positions more important than these positions for 2024? So, and again, that's where prioritization of all of the positions is going to be helpful to help us draw where that line is. Yep.
Can we have a bucket for Supervisor Shirley's idea for the committee to say, here's the million to work with in that, rather than us pick and choose which one now?
No.
Oh. Wow. Even my wife doesn't say that. What the heck?
I've been a dad for a long time, so that just comes out sometimes.
You got me beat then.
Yeah, so these positions are in the referendum, and so, but I just said, not every position's created equally. So you may say, these are the positions that I care about. These positions here are really lower on my list. And so it's good to know that. And so if you just put everything in one bucket,
I track with what you're saying. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Dad.
How many positions do we have right now that are funded by ARPA through 2024? And then with the opioid money that's coming, can we use any of that to fund any new positions?
Did you have 5 or 7, Bob?
There's 2, 4, 5, 7 total that we fund through ARPA.
Yeah. 7 total are funded through ARPA through 2024, and 2 within Justice Support Services that were funded through the end of 2023. So 9 total positions are funded with ARPA dollars. The opioid money is going to be enough for about 1 position. There is no easy button up here. I mean, these are tough choices, but this is where we're at. So you were each distributed $1 million. If the referendum had gone through, I would have given you $4.5 million, $1 million new and the $3.5 that was approved. So think about how different that exercise would be. But since we are limited to just the new money that we have coming in, that's it, $1 million. Show me where your priorities are. At the end of the exercise, I'll take a weighted average and we'll provide you a summary. So feel free to get up, come on into the...
Can I just add one thing? To make it easier, the way you're thinking about this, it's almost what we're doing is we're separating priorities from funding. So in other words, we're going to set priorities first, and then once we've set the priorities, then we figure out how to fund. So if you just kind of set the funding aside for right now while you're looking at this, because you're just saying, what are my priorities? What should our priorities be as a body? So.
We already did this. We know the answers. Hardest job yet. You're among friends.
Oh, I think it'd take a while. I got spanked up with a pen. That's like
Okay, we're ready for the big reveal here.
So we've used a weighted average of the amounts and prioritized them. So this is them sorted in order of priority then. So the sheriff's deputy, so there was $3.85 million worth of chips put in there, which when allocated out against the $1 million we have available would be on average of $213,000. I rounded that up to $250. Again, we can talk about rounding on some of these. At $250, it'd be funding 1.6 positions within the sheriff's office. On justice support case managers, which was number 2, it came in at $116,000. I rounded it down to $100,000, and we can maybe switch those roundings around because this would be retaining 1 case manager of the 2 positions. Health insurance was number 3 on the list. $111,000 on average was allocated by the 18 supervisors present today, which means $100,000 allocated for increase, so that's a 1% increase to the health insurance premiums, which would mean we would have to reduce the benefits in order to get us to that level of health insurance coverage premium increase. 4th on the list was the CHIPS attorney. $108,000 was allocated to that. I did round that up then to $150,000 so we could have a whole CHIPS attorney instead of just a partial CHIP attorney. So $150,000. Employee compensation, that came in at $83,000. I rounded it up just as a round number of $100,000, which would be 1/3% increase COLA. Union contract compensation, that came in right on target at the $50,000 expense. IT operating only came in at $50,000. Some of you didn't believe John, but I don't think Microsoft is going to give us any discounts, half price increase, so I did allocate the full $100,000 there. Like I said, some of these we don't have much of a choice on. The court-appointed counsel then, $47,000 was allocated. This one actually we should change. All right, we could change that to $50,000. And so that's an allocation to support that, which leaves me now $50,000 to reassign. On the jail meal contract, we had $50,000 there. That's probably where it should have been. On the CDE operating. So some of these, there's just not enough dollar amounts allocated to fill them. Some of them we don't have any choice but to fill these because they're going to be inflationary choices. Inflation was down to 5%, if anyone read that yesterday. So it is working its way down, but 5% inflation is still 5% inflation. That's a big impact on our operating budgets. So out of the $1 million, this is where I see the allocation. So here's where you can talk now about, is this in line with your priorities? Is this put into a resolution form as we've had in past years? We're going to support these positions. We're going to support these operation increases, this for health insurance, this for compensation. So is that the priority order that you wanted in overall? And then you can tell me, you know, what's next on this list. So the next dollar I have available, where is that going to go?
I had one question on the health insurance. That also is, I mean, we really don't have a lot of choice in that, do we? I mean, I know it's listed as a high priority, but I think we all realize that we're going to incur some costs there, whether we maintain or cut benefits. So is that really true priority?
Yeah, you can. The employees behind me probably don't want to hear it, but you can cut the benefit. I mean, you don't have to maintain the same level of coverage. So right now, the employees contribute 10% of the premium. You could increase that to 15% of the premium, and that saves 5% for the county. If you cost shift to the employee, that's savings for the county. It's going to resync just a second, Dan. Hold on. Just wait. Now. Stop touching it. Stop touching it.
Thanks. I took the battery out because the thing was not working. All right, so, Bob, you're scaring me because every time I'm going to ask a question, you ask it first. 3 times today. That's good. Health benefits. I know we can reduce the cost, but it really affects employee morale in a bad way. So if we don't have to, I'd prefer not to. Is health benefits included in that line item?
Yes. So that's $100,000 that was allocated to health insurance. So at $100,000, I'm going to have to reduce coverage and shift cost. At $250,000, I think it'd be a minimal decrease in benefits. I think it'd be manageable. It'd have to be $500,000 if you want no reduction at all in the health insurance. Because that's the inflationary rate for health insurance is 5%, which would be $500,000.
Could we ask the administration committee, or have you've shopped for another package without reducing benefits? We've shopped for another provider, that kind of thing?
So we are self-insured. We determine the level of benefits in any given year.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
So I see all these no choice but to fund things.
Yep.
I think this exercise would be more helpful if we had a list of no choice but to funds, how much is left over, and then what do we want to do with it? Because it would look like we're saying not to fund them. Well, we have no choice. So we're just showing you our priorities, not saying don't fund it. So,
Yep.
yeah.
And I get that. A little bit of it was I wanted you to feel my pain when I have to put the budget together. That I don't have any choice. Some of the allocations I make is just because it's going to have to be there. I mean, I'm going to have to fund whatever Microsoft says is the increase for software. I mean, there's just really no choice to that. And the $1 million we have coming in is the $1 million we're going to have coming in. That's real. So I just wanted to share with you that sometimes the choices we make aren't choices at all. They're being told to us by others.
So how much do all these no choice but the funds add up to, and then what's left over? I don't, it seems that's a number we need to know to really budget. This is just kind of new stuff. I mean, overall. How much is the no choice and how much is left over, and then we prioritize it.
You're saying highlight it in here?
Yeah, well, we have a $120 million budget. And so we went through an exercise at all the standing committees to talk about what's mandated service and what's non-mandated service. Now, they're related but not exactly the same. So really, a lot of our operational expenses are dictated by others. So by Microsoft or by the jail meal contract, by vendors that are saying, this is what our price is, take it or leave it, and you don't really get to leave it. That's a no choice. The other side of that, though, is the mandated services, which, highlighting that in there. 75–80% of everything we do is mandated by the state or by some function that we do. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the service level we deliver at, but it does mean that that service is mandated to be provided. And so, I mean, it's most of the budget, quite frankly. That's how come we're not really saying, well, let's cut this and let's cut that. For county government, that's not really a choice. You can't just start cutting things out of the budget because you're required to do it, or if you do cut it, you're probably cutting a revenue source that's tied to it, or if you do cut it, you're going to cost yourself more money downstream somewhere else.
Looking at the budget that's out, I can't figure out what is level service compared to. Thank you. Looking at the budget, I'm like, well, what's the level of service? Is it mandated? How much? I'd like to see like a square number. This is the bare minimum we have to do to meet a mandate. We do this much above it on all of them, and then we can compare and cut where we need to and transfer. Right now, to do our jobs, it seems like we need to do that. Otherwise, unless I just don't know how to read a budget, I'm really confused on that.
I think I can Yeah. Yeah.
I think I understand.
I don't see an easy solution to get there, so please do.
Yeah, so last year we went through squares and tiles on a spreadsheet of what was funded and what's not. What wasn't associated with that is how that plays into actual budget dollars. So like if, oh gosh, who can I pick on? Who wants me to pick on them? Lisa, can I pick on you? So Lisa's budget, how, like, of those dollars, what's required to be funded if it's, let's say it's $1 million budget, not saying that that's what it is, but if it's $1 million budget, to deliver the level of service that's required statutorily, what is that dollar amount? So that dollar amount then becomes $750. $250 is discretionary for us as the board, but then go back that $250, if we don't fund it, we lose $100,000 from the state. Right? I mean, so I think those are the things that Supervisor Carlson is looking for, and maybe others are as well. Is that what you're looking for?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So child support is the example. Their budget with the tiles are up on the screen. So are you required?
Yes.
All right. They're required. Their entire budget is mandated service. They're not doing anything that's unmandated. So the entire page is mandated. Now, the level of service delivery may be different. I mean, you could say, well, I don't want to provide that good of service. Okay, well, we could decrease the level of service, we could decrease the level of collections, which will also decrease the level of state funding that we have, because you may, right, which affects the revenue. So you can decrease the level of service and thereby producing less revenue in the long run and worse service to the constituents of the county.
But isn't that what we're trying to do with priorities? This is bare minimum, we have this much, but if we spend the money here, we can't spend it there. That seems to be how we should be deciding, not this, we have $1 million that we know we're going to get, how should we, I don't find that horribly useful, except for letting you know when you're figuring out numbers. But it'd be nice to look at the whole budget and do priorities. I mean, is it worth it to cut some from here because we don't need level of service, to increase the level of service in the sheriff's department or in CHIPS? Or it'd be nice to be able to do that, and I almost think that's what we're called to do here, and I don't feel like we're doing that at all in a way.
I'll just note there are a couple other hands in the air. I'll let the administrator call on them, and he's always open for further discussion on the nuances of this as well, but I'll let the administrator call on people.
Right. Dan?
Yeah, just continuing, this is good discussion, you know, in terms of getting a feel for this in the first, this would be your second go around, and the first time it's all very, very new, and this time it's still, I think it takes 2 terms to really learn this job, and there's no easy answer. So this is very legitimate conversation, but there's a nuance to this too. Saying is it mandatory or is it not mandatory is very basic conversation, because then there's things like grants, you know. It's not mandatory, but there's a grant which is supporting it, and if we cut it because it's not mandatory, well, then we have to give back grant money, and that happens in Health and Human Services and in community development. And then there's things that aren't mandatory and aren't grant funded necessarily, like the water testing. It's very important to people who live out in the rural area that we continue that, because they get the free well testing that we do once or twice a year, and it's important to farmers, and it's important to people because they're curious, what's the condition of our water? It's been a priority over and over again at this county board. So it's not very much money, and it would be easy to cut, but it's something that we should continue. So there's nuance, you know, and that's where we kind of rely on the staff.
Supervisor Shirley?
I guess I think what would help going through the budget book when we get it in the fall would be maybe color coding. I know you like doing that. It would color code what is, especially in Health and Human Services, you see a lot of that. They're either, we could color code which ones are tied to grants, which ones are we're getting revenue out of, so if we cut, we're going to lose the revenue. Something that ties that all together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. The level of complexity, the budget's going to go from 250 pages to 2,500 pages. I mean, to provide the level of detail that you're asking for, we would absolutely 100% overwhelm you. I mean, it would be thousands of staff hour, and it would be a document so big, nobody would get through it. Really, I think if you have a specific area that you said, I would really like to look at this area closer, we can look at any individual area and do an analysis for you. But to do the whole $120 million budget is probably too big of an ask to accomplish with any efficiency.
Calling Chairman Long and then Cook and Hanson in that order.
This is a cyclical thing that we've wrestled with as supervisors over many years. So this would be my 9th time at this rodeo, and or 10th. So, and Dave Osnes and Mr. Otino will remember when we had gone that route, and we had a budget book that was probably 1,000 pages, and I was dutiful in reading it and highlighting it with different colored highlighters, and confused myself deeply, and sent many emails to department heads, some of whom are maybe still around. And you know, the net result is you still have to rely on the staff to help you with the nuance and answer these questions for you. It is, the bottom line is, and then we went through a whole simplification process over a number of years. How do we get that budget book down to 50, 60 pages so that we can have something where we're looking at the numbers of what the staff absolutely needs, and we do this through the committee process. And I will tell you, the process that we have right now works better than the process we used to have. That
I think I'm up front. Chair Long.
Just one second. We'll call on Chairman Long and then Supervisor Cook, and then we'll get back to Supervisor Carlson.
I think maybe another approach that may get at what you're trying to get at, Supervisor Carlson, is maybe to identify the discretionary services. Now, there are certain discretionary services that, like for Microsoft, that you got to pay. But what would those discretionary services be that are truly discretionary, so we could get a better idea of maybe there are other areas that we would be able to make some reasonable cuts to help fund some of these other priorities. So that may be easier for the administrator to do, possibly.
Yeah, and I think, so I want to get an idea of where you want to spend money. And I know that's we don't have to just spend money, but if we're going to spend money, where do we want to spend it at? And then we can talk about where that revenue side is. Is it the new money, the $1 million new money coming in? Is it the state provides us additional funding that we don't know about yet, so then I can fund more things? Is it cuts to other expenses so we can fund these over those? Is it using one-time money to fund something? Those are all options, but I have to know where the expense side is first, and then fill in with the revenue side till everybody's happy. Well, okay, not everyone's going to be happy, but as much as possible.
Supervisor Cook?
I want to thank Ken for the exercise. It was great and horrible at the same time, because it basically really puts into reality some of the challenges that we have as a board here. I'm looking at the outcomes here, and if $100,000 for health insurance and then the $100,000 for employee compensation, so basically less than a 1% COLA, that's no step increase, right?
Correct.
And then significant reduction in likely benefits and increased costs for health employees. I mean, we have seen multiple department directors come up here and tell us that they have lost staff who are leaving. We know it's an issue for us, and I just feel like if we don't, just the numbers that are up here right now, if we're asking our employees to not even have a 1% increase and to pay more for health insurance for less benefits, it's insulting, and we are going to lose more employees. So it's horrible that we can't hire these positions. I mean, these positions, all the advocacy for them, I think they're really important. I think the services, I think we need those positions, but unfortunately we're in a scenario where we are restricted by what we can actually do as a board here to provide services to this community. So I think we need to make sure that we are aware that if we cut benefits and compensation, to the whatever level this is going to require, that we're going to lose more employees, and it's going to be more stress on the employees that remain, and it's going to impact service levels even more. So, this was a great and horrible exercise, but there's a reality here that we're going to have to face.
We've got Supervisor Carlson and Supervisor Leaf, and then we're not going to cut anybody off, but if we're nearing the end of discussion, and after that, I would ask the administrator to wrap things up, but Supervisor Carlson and then Leaf.
Well, what kind of sent me down this rabbit hole was when Supervisor Ortino a while back said, I don't want to see a budget unless we cut everything 10% except for the sheriffs. And that made me think, is there enough that each one could cut 10% or 5% from their budgets? Is that a possibility? Or is everything so mandated it's not a possibility? So that's kind of where I'm coming from on that. I mean, I haven't yet seen anybody come up and say, I can cut my budget a little bit. Everybody says, if I don't get this, disaster is going to happen because we don't have that. And we do need to have those things, but what can we cut, what can't we? And that's what I find impossible to know, as, what can we cut? So.
Yeah, to that point, because I talked to Supervisor Ortino after he said that comment, and I told him no. It doesn't work that way. So in county government, because so much is mandated, you can't just say 10% everyone. That's just not a realistic expectation. What you can do, though, is affect the tax levy rate. And so that I can take direction on and say, I don't want to see a tax increase. So there are ways to do that, usually using cash fund balance. Instead of funding positions, use it to reduce debt service, which equates to no tax levy increase for the taxpayer. That's the methodology in the system that I recommend for the county board of how to use cash reserves to affect the tax rate. So it's not necessarily about the spending, although we want to prioritize the spending. It's also about what you want to see as the tax rate.
Supervisor Lee.
Sean has a question too, but yeah. But
I'll
I'll make it brief. I totally echo what Supervisor Cook said regarding employee compensation and health insurance. I think if we do this, we will lose valuable employees, and then we're in a world of hurt. I think the mandated services piece that people are asking, we did this exercise at the committee level, and there are reports in from each of the committees that list what's mandated and what isn't. And if we could maybe compile those so everyone can see them all together, that might answer the question without having to add 1,000 pages to the budget. But we did this exercise for a reason, so let's use what we did to see what we have and what maybe important programs. I mean, I would caution people again that, some of the programs are still vital to the community, even though they might not be mandated. So take it with a grain of salt, but we could start there, and I think that would be something that would be useful.
We'll go to Supervisor Anderson.
Yeah, to echo what Supervisor Lee said, those compiled reports also do include the funding methods and how things are funded, so they would include things like grant covers 60% of this, et cetera. I also did want to mention personally, as far as water testing is concerned, if we have to pay for that with fund balance every single year, I do not want to cut that program. And then as far as additional dollars that are concerned, my first priority would be maintaining that second justice support case manager, and then a second position in the sheriff's office, a full second position in the sheriff's office, and then whatever we can do for health insurance and step COLA increases.
Calling Chairman Long and then Administrator Witt.
One real quick comment. As you look at the spreadsheet, it's almost like don't look at the numbers. All right, we were trying to set priorities and not necessarily say how we're going to fund it. So forget about the numbers and just look at that last column. That's the priorities that we set or through this exercise, and that's the question you have to ask yourself, are we comfortable with that? So it's not necessarily that we're going to give a 0.3, whatever, I can't read it, COLA. That's the point in the priorities that, depending upon the funding that we can come up with. So don't get too hung up on the numbers. It's the priorities you really need to focus on.
Yeah, and that's really where we're getting then for next level, priority level. So, you know, if we took the $1 million and we were able to do this is what I can do. Now, let's talk about if one of the other revenue side options or expense reduction options comes to fruition, what are the next things that we want to fund? And so what I'm hearing is the second justice support case manager, additional sheriff deputies, additional to health insurance, additional to compensation. Am I capturing this right, or is this in the wrong order? Is there additional things that should be on this list?
Supervisor Van Summer.
Again, Ken, thanks for all the work you did. One thing, though, I thought we have to keep in mind, the back of our mind, is that the public has spoken on the last vote for the referendum, and I advocated for that because I think all of those things on that referendum were very, very important. A number of people told me they didn't vote for it because they don't want to pay more taxes. So we've done the exercise, and that's great. But the public still wants us to cut. And that kind of goes along with Supervisor Carlson's and Latino's too. I think it would be important if the public found out what is mandated. It would surprise them. This is what we have no choice to do. This is not even a list, but at least a dollar amount. This has to happen. Whether you like it or not, this is what's going to happen. I think that might be a suggestion we might want to look at in the future.
I think within the budget book, I think one of the sections that we'll add, or maybe we'll add it into each individual section, is the mandated spreadsheet from every department. I mean, the work's already done. We just need to incorporate it into the budget book. So we'll go to 350 pages, but at least all the data will be there together. Here's all of the cost. You know, this is how the money is spent and the revenues. Here's what's mandated. You know, you flip the child support and go, oh, it's mandated. Well, let's go to the next page.
If there are no other supervisors seeking recognition, but there is, Supervisor Cook?
Sorry. I'm just looking at the next priority level list there, and I guess if we're looking at the initial list, and it does include some sheriff deputies already, I would personally like to see one of the HHS positions in there. I mean, we have a lot of need across the county, and so if we're expending some additional funds, I mean, we had Bob talk about these are positions that are mandated services, and we have to provide them, and there is an increased demand in there, and those demand impacts families across our county. So I think we should be, if we can find additional funds, I think we should be spreading it out across some of the services that we mandate.
Are there any other supervisors seeking recognition? Supervisor Shirley.
Just one item that I wanted to talk about before we left today was I personally would like to see the budget book in the fall, if we could get it a month earlier than we did last year.
With that, if I see no other supervisors seeking recognition, I'd just ask the administrator if he could very quickly review the way ahead in terms of the chronological development of the budget over the next few months.
Yes. All right. So right now, the departments are going to be submitting their budgets in July. I sit down with all of them in August. September, the budget actually is out. It's out in 5 separate versions, though, one for each of the standing committees. So you are seeing it there. So are you looking at the committee of the whole budget that's presented in October, or are you looking at the September presentation? Which one moved up a month earlier?
The packet that we got a few days before our meeting, if we could get that whole packet earlier so it's all compiled in one spot.
Okay. All right, that was the October one. So that's really the county administrator's recommended budget. So that's a balanced budget. The 5 budget versions we review in September aren't balanced. That's basically all the budget requests. Some of the numbers aren't still coming in until the end of September, so that's part of the challenge. I don't know if I can get it to you a full month ahead of time, a few weeks probably. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, well, we made a lot of progress today. Thank you, all the supervisors, for your input and collegiality, and it was a very, very good discussion, I think, today. Thank you, Ken, for your creativity in having the buckets. And with that, we'll conclude the business items on the agenda, and we'll go to requests for future agenda items. We're not going to meet again until October, so I don't know that we really can suggest anything there. If we don't have anything there, any announcements or correspondence from anybody? Seeing none, the date will be set later for the specific date for the next COTW, Committee of the Whole meeting, but it will be in October, typically the third.
We'll have one earlier for the KIP projects.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're exactly right. There'll be one on the KIP projects, and then on this process in October, the third or fourth week in October. Yep. And with that, thank you again, and we're adjourned.